Thank you all for joining us. I'm Kate Rader, the marketing specialist at NBS, and I also have Kathy Uhl with me. She's the Director of Relationship Management, Growth, and Retention at NBS. And I'll let Steve, the presenter, introduce himself shortly. We will get through this pretty quickly, and if you have any questions, there's a Q&A section. You can submit them, and we'll answer them at the end of the presentation. This is also being recorded, and the presentation deck, along with the video, will be sent out to everyone that registered. So we'll get that to you here in the near future after the presentation, and we appreciate you being here. Steve, you can get started.
Thanks, Kate. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. As Kate said, my name is Steve Sandel. I'm part of our business development team here at NBS. I've been here since 2008, and we saw from those of you that registered, I've worked with most of you before. Some of you I recognize the name, but maybe haven't talked to. It looks like we've got a combination of maybe plan contacts that work with us on the FSA side, brokers that are advising their clients on how to set up FSAs. In this meeting, we kind of want to talk about the different considerations that you have as the employer sponsoring an FSA. FSAs, as you all know, stand for Flexible Spending Account, which I think is interesting in the way in that sometimes FSAs or flexible spending accounts aren't all that flexible. Not flexible in the way that once an employee makes an election, they're not able to change it unless they have a qualified event for a change of status. Not flexible in the way that the IRS determines what you can and can't use your FSA funds for. So from what I've seen, the name Flexible Spending Account is based off the idea that they're flexible in the way that your employees get to decide how much they contribute from their paycheck for these expenses that are eligible to be purchased with pre-tax funds. And flexible also in the way that you, and as the employer that's sponsoring an FSA plan, have the option to design it in a way that's best for you and best for your employees. From what we've seen, when employers are trying to figure out how to design or set up their FSA, they approach it from two different considerations. And first is how do they eliminate their risk as the employer, and how important is that to them? As most of you are aware, FSAs are considered dual risk benefits. There's risk to the employee in the fact that they can forfeit funds if they don't spend what they decide to contribute for the year. And then risk to the employer as well, in the fact that the uniform coverage rule is what it's called, allows an employee to spend what they've elected at the first day of the plan year, regardless of how much they've contributed. So if you have an employee that overspends midway through the plan year, they spend more than they've contributed, and then they terminate, leaving a negative balance in their FSA account, you as the employer become responsible for that. Oftentimes, positive forfeitures from other employees can offset that, but if there's a situation where at the end of the year, the total forfeiture for your FSA plan is negative, it becomes the employer's responsibility to cover that from their own general assets. You can't ask the employees to pay back what they've overspent. Even if they offered to do that, you're not supposed to accept that. So keeping that risk in mind, employers come up with considerations that they need to make. Where do they want to design their FSA to be a little bit more beneficial to the employee, giving them greater access to funds, eliminating their risk of forfeiting money? Or do you want to set it up as the employer where you can do as much as possible to eliminate your risk with the FSA? Some of the things that we're going to talk about today are the key factors in setting it up. We'll talk about rollover options, how that can impact you as the employer and how it can help your employees. We'll talk about the grace period, which works in the same way, where it can be a benefit to employees, but it can also increase the chance of having negative forfeitures as the employer. And then also how cost of living adjustments affect all of that as well. So we're going to start by talking about the rollover or the carryover option with an FSA. FSAs began in 1978, and when they were first designed, there was no option for a grace period, no option for a carryover. So it was a complete use it or lose it benefit. They remained that way until 2013. So for 35 years, it was strictly use it or lose it, no rollover option. But in 2013, the IRS announced that they were going to allow employers to have the option that would allow their employees to roll funds over. Initially, that was capped at a flat rate of $500 But now the carryover is associated with the cost of living adjustments that the IRS makes every year. The carryover is tied to the FSA maximum contribution amount, and the maximum carryover is 20% of what that maximum carryover amount is. So now in 2023, the maximum that an employer can allow an employee to contribute to their FSA is $3,050. The maximum carryover is determined by taking 20% of that, and that's where the $610 come from. Along with that, some specifics about the carryover. It can only be offered with a healthcare FSA or a limited purpose FSA. It's not something that you can offer with a dependent care FSA. Not sure why that is, but the reason may have something to do that with dependent care, there is a little bit less risk to the employee. Dependent care expenses are a little bit easier to estimate. And with the maximum contribution for dependent care being $5,000, often people are spending well over that. So they wish that they could contribute more to their dependent care FSA. So again, we're not completely sure why you can't allow the rollover with the dependent care, but that's something to consider if you're thinking of designing an FSA or changing the design of your current FSA. And another thing to mention is the rollover is not cumulative from year to year. So as an example, if someone rolls 610 from 2023 to 2024, at the end of 2024, they can't roll that 610 again, and then whatever the maximum rollover is for 2024, it would just be capped at whatever the maximum rollover is. A grace period is another option that employers can look at to help their employees have a better experience with not losing funds that they can't spend by the end of the plan year. Grace period is additional time for employees to incur expenses after the plan year ends. So an example is if someone elects $1,000 for 2023, their plan year ends December 31st of this year. If they've only spent $700 by the end of this year and their employer allows a grace period, they can continue to incur expenses into 2024 during that grace period and use those expenses to spend down their 2023 funds. So the $300 that they have left from 2023. With a grace period, the maximum that you can offer is 75 days or 2.5 months. So for plans ending December 31st of 2023, the maximum grace period would be March 15th of 2024, meaning employees could continue to incur expenses through March 15th and spend down their 2023 balances. But it can be less than that. If you want to offer a grace period, but not the full 75 days, you could go with a grace period of 30 days, 60 days, whatever you choose. The grace period can be offered with the dependent care benefit too, unlike the carryover. So we do see employers that will elect the carryover or the rollover for their healthcare FSA, their limited FSA, and then they decide that they want to go with the grace period for their dependent care FSA as well. Again, these are ways that you as the employer can make it easier for your employees to have as much possibility to spend their funds as you see fit. But again, by giving them additional time to spend their funds or additional carryover, that is going to impact your forfeiture at the end of the year. So oftentimes if we see employers with high turnover, they're trying to figure out how to reduce their risk. They'll opt not to go with a rollover or a grace period just so that their employees have more of that risk that they carry. And hopefully those employers are able to offset their chance of having negative forfeiture at the end of the year. We're going to talk a little bit about cost of living adjustments as well, because those are things that an employer should consider when designing their FSA, specifically their liability, in terms of what the cost of living adjustments mean to you as the employer. Cost of living adjustments are announced every year, and it's not really on a specific time frame when that happens. If we're lucky, then it happens around now, as most employers are going into open enrollment. But the IRS isn't always as helpful or as friendly with releasing those new amounts for the upcoming year. Most of the time it is announced during open enrollment season, busy open enrollment season for plans that renewed January 1st. But we have seen in the past that sometimes those cost of living adjustments haven't been announced until after the new year starts. And so then if you want to adopt those new limits, you can allow them to apply retroactively if that's what you choose to do. But cost of living adjustments in terms of how they impact these spending accounts, they're applied to FSA limits, and that includes maximum contribution limits, also the rollover maximum, and then also for those of you that have commuter benefits, parking and transit benefits, those are subject to cost of living adjustments at the end of every year as well. Dependent care is also something that could be subject to cost of living adjustments, although that rarely happens. I can't think of the last time that maximum has increased. It's been at $5,000 for as long as I can remember. Before we talk about how those work with HSAs too, just one thing to mention, as I mentioned, the contribution limit impacts the carryover limit with FSAs. It's always 20% of what the carryover limit is. That applies to what the IRS releases as the limit, but that may not apply to your specific plan. So an example of that, of what I'm talking about, is you can set in your plan document whether or not you want your plan to be subject to cost of living adjustments, or you can just choose to keep it as a flat dollar amount. For the first few years that rollover was allowed, it was capped at 500 and it wasn't subject to cost of living adjustments. And then when the IRS announced that that was going to be increasing and that they were going to consider it for cost of living adjustments going forward, employers had the option of saying, we want to keep our rollover at $500, or we want to put language in our plan document where if cost of living adjustment is announced that it impacts the rollover, our maximum rollover will automatically increase to coincide with the maximum that the IRS allows. So if you're unfamiliar with what's in your plan document, or you think you may want to change it, you can reach out to your relationship manager at NBS. They can let you know what your maximum is, whether it's a flat amount for the contribution amount, whether it's a flat amount for the rollover amount, or whether either of those are subject to cost of living adjustments. Rollovers and grace period with FSAs can cause issues with employees who are contributing to HSAs. So for example, if you're an employer that offers both an FSA and an HSA, you have an employee who's on the FSA this year, and they're going to have funds remaining at the end of the plan year. If they're wanting to enroll in an HSA in 2024, the funds remaining in their FSA can impact their HSA eligibility in 2024. HSAs don't work really well with other benefits. If you're covered by an FSA and other medical plan, that's going to make you ineligible to contribute to an HSA. And so that's why you'd want to consider what you're doing with your FSA and how it could impact employees' HSA eligibility. The way that it works with FSA dollars and rollovers and grace periods is it's based on the coverage period. So an example of how that works with the grace period, if you're an employer that offers a grace period of, let's say, 75 days, and your plan ends this year on December 31st. If you have an employee that, let's say, they only have $50 remaining on the last day of this plan year, and you have a grace period, when the new plan year starts on January 1st, 2024, they're considered to be covered by the FSA for that full coverage period. So that would be the full 75-day grace period. Even if they spend that $50 on January 2nd and their FSA balance is now zero, because they entered the coverage period with an FSA balance at all, they're covered by the FSA for the full coverage period of the 2.5-month grace period, and they wouldn't be able to contribute to an HSA until after that coverage period ends. The coverage period is even longer with a rollover because you're considered to be covered by your rollover funds for the coverage period would be the whole next plan year. So if you enter the new plan year with a $50 rollover balance, you're covered for that full plan year. Even if you spend that $50, technically you're still not HSA eligible and shouldn't contribute to your HSA until the following year. We've seen some employers take different approaches to help employees with that situation. This isn't considered to be legal advice, and it's not clear IRS guidance on whether or not this is okay. So we would always recommend that you consult with a benefits attorney or benefits advisor if you're considering doing this with your own plan. But what we've seen other employers do is that they'll allow their employees to convert those grace period funds or those rollover funds to limited FSA dollars. If they convert those to limited FSA dollars, which can only be used for dental and vision expenses, then at that point they would be HSA eligible and they could contribute to their HSA. for the following year. I think most of you are probably familiar with the differences and similarities between an FSA and an HSA. We won't walk through all these, but I think a question that we get often when we attend benefit fairs and enrollment meetings from employees is they ask us, what would you recommend that I do, the FSA or the HSA? At times when we've been there and maybe we're only administering the FSA, it would be really easy to say you should definitely enroll in the FSA because that would be better for us at NBS. But we try not to do that. We try to give the employee the best advice for them and help them understand that it's really not a choice between the FSA and the HSA. It's a bigger decision than that. When employees are trying to decide what to enroll in between the HSA and the FSA, we instruct them to look at the health plans that are available. An HSA can only be combined with a high deductible health plan. So if you're wanting to enroll in the high deductible health plan, the HSA would be the best option for you. If you're wanting to enroll in the traditional medical plan that works best for you and your family, your dependents, then the FSA would be the best option for you. So although there are some similarities, some differences, when you're comparing the two, it's not really based on an option of what's better out of the FSA or the HSA for you. It's better to approach that looking at the medical plan options that are available and then making your decision after you decide what medical plan is best for you. The IRS hasn't announced the limits for 2024, so those are still outstanding, and we'll definitely communicate those once those are released. We have seen online that there are some benefit experts that project that the healthcare FSA maximum contribution will increase in 2024. As I mentioned, the current limit is $3,050, and projections show that should increase to $3,200 in 2024. Because the maximum rollover is tied to that in terms of what you can offer as the employee for a maximum rollover, that would mean that the maximum rollover would increase as well. Since it's 20% of whatever the maximum contribution amount is, it's projected that the maximum rollover amount will increase from $610 this year to $640 in 2024. We haven't seen any projections on what the commuter limits will increase to, if at all, or if there would be a surprising increase to the dependent care FSA. But as I mentioned, as soon as we receive word that those are announced, we'll communicate that out to our brokers and our clients. Another thing to consider when you're offering your FSA and you want to figure out how to help employees be in situations where they're not spending funds is to give them options or ideas on how their funds can be spent. So we wanted to mention a partnership that we have with an online store called the FSA store and the HSA store. It's obviously an online store that you can go to that only sells products that are FSA or HSA eligible. And when we've directed participants to check the store out to see what's eligible, they're often surprised by some of the things that they find on there that are eligible that they never would have considered to be eligible themselves. So if you do have employees that are reaching out to you trying to figure out how they can spend their funds before the plan year ends, FSA store is a great option. And just because the product is on there doesn't mean it needs to be purchased there in order to be eligible. A lot of our clients in Hawaii, for example, they incur a shipping charge if they were to purchase anything from the FSA store or the HSA store. Here on the mainland or outside of Alaska and Hawaii, FSA store doesn't charge anything for shipping over a certain amount, but they usually do for participants that are in Alaska and Hawaii. So what we recommend is if you have a participant that sees an item on the FSA store that they think they're interested in purchasing, but they don't want to order it through the FSA store or the HSA store for some reason, they can purchase that same item anywhere else. Long's, Walmart, Walgreens, CSV, those same items should be FSA eligible anywhere. And the FSA store could just be used as an idea of what is eligible, and then the employee could find a different merchant to purchase that product from if they don't want to buy it through the FSA store. Oops, I accidentally clicked on the link. So that kind of covers the considerations that we wanted to talk about today. If you're thinking of designing an FSA or changing your FSA, we wanted to leave some time for questions, so I'll turn it back over to Kate to go over any questions that we may have received.
Great, thank you, Steve. We do have a couple questions here so far. The first one, if the employer's FSA annual maximum is less than 2,500, is the minimum annual rollover still 500, or is it still based on the 20% rule?
Good question. It would be whatever you decide as the employer. It doesn't have to be tied to your maximum contribution amount and then 20% of that. If your maximum contribution is 2,500, you could still offer a maximum carryover of 610 if you wanted to. You don't have to offer the 3,050 in order to offer the 610 as a rollover. So you can kind of decide that as you want as the employer or the plan sponsor. But even though it is connected with cost of living adjustments and how the IRS views it, you can make those choices independently as the employer when you're setting your maximum contribution amount, and then when you're setting your carryover maximum as well. Those don't have to be tied 20% like the cost of living adjustments. They can differentiate based on what you feel is best for your plan. Great.
Next one, can I change my FSA election amount during the year?
I'm assuming that's being asked as maybe from the employer perspective, if they can change the maximum contribution amount during the year. And technically you could, but it really wouldn't benefit you if you did, because participants can't change their election mid-plan year anyway. If you were to increase your maximum contribution, everyone that's already enrolled wouldn't have the option to increase their election for the year. They'd have to wait until open enrollment anyway. So it would only apply to new hires and could run into some issues with that. And then you couldn't decrease it either, because if someone's already elected, maybe your maximum is 3,000, someone's already elected that. If you wanted to change it mid-year to be 2,500, you can't force the employee to drop their election down to a new amount. So although you do have the option to make changes to your maximum contribution amount mid-year, we wouldn't recommend that. And in almost every situation, it's going to be best to do it on a prospective basis for the upcoming plan year, doing it sometime when your open enrollment period occurs.
Okay, can the cost of living level be set to a certain level on a rollover, or does it adjust every year?
It can be set to a certain level. If you don't want it to adjust from year to year with the cost of living adjustments. So let's say right now that you are using cost of living adjustment language in your plan document, where your current maximum rollover is 610. If you decide that you don't want to increase that every year cost of living adjustments are announced, you can amend your document to say that your carryover amount is going to be capped at 610 for every year going forward. And then if cost of living adjustments are announced, although other employers could increase their maximum rollover, yours would stay the same.
Okay, the next one. If no HSA contribution can be made during the grace period for a person switching from an FSA, does that apply to employer HSA contributions during the grace period?
Yeah, good question. That applies to any contributions at all to that employee's contribution. So whether it's the employee contributing or the employer contributing, if someone is covered by an FSA during that grace period, they don't have HSA eligibility to have contributions go into their account. So that means they can't contribute to the HSA and their employer can't contribute to their HSA either.
Okay, we have a couple more. When do employees have access to their rollover amount?
The way that we do that at NBS is in a way to give them immediate access. So although most FSAs will have a runout period where they can submit claims for the prior year that were incurred, but they haven't been reimbursed for, we don't wait until that runout period ends to give them access to their rollover funds for current year expenses. And I could get into the way that our system works with that, but basically it just looks to maximize their benefit. So if someone does have funds that are left over, we still allow them to access those funds for any prior year expenses. But if they wanted to use it for current year expenses too, we're not going to withhold the rollover dollars from them until after the runout period ends. They'll have immediate access to it as soon as their new plan year begins.
Okay, the next one is a double. Can I change my HSA election amount during the year, and how much do I need in an HSA account to invest?
So with an HSA, they are more flexible than a flexible spending account in that aspect, where you can make changes as often as you want for any reason. So an employee can change their contribution level from paycheck to paycheck, from month to month, whatever they see fit. They don't need a qualifying event for that. The minimum account balance that you need with NBS to invest your HSA funds is $1,000. So once you have $1,000 in your cash account or your spending account with your HSA, anything above that $1,000 can be invested through our investment or our participant portal, just using the investment tools there.
Okay, great. It looks like those will be all of the questions. If anyone has any other questions they might think of after the presentation, you can contact your relationship manager, or you can contact Steve directly. His contact information is on the screen now. And we appreciate you all spending your time with us, and hopefully we see you in the next webinar. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Kate. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.